The scent of rot and damp earth was my only comfort. It was the smell of being forgotten, a perfume of invisibility I wore like a shroud. From my hiding place in the abandoned root cellar beneath the old hunter's cabin, the sounds of the choosing ceremony were a faint, terrifying pulse carried on the wind, the thrum of drums, the distant howl of a wolf finding its mate. For them, it was a night of destiny. For me, it was a night of survival. I was Lysandra, an Omega, and broken. That was the word they used, whispered behind cupped hands when they thought I couldn't hear. Broken, because my wolf was a fractured thing, a whisper of instinct without a true voice or form. While other girls my age blossomed into the strength of their inner beasts, anticipating the claiming bite of a mate, I had remained incomplete. My scent was muted, a pale, watery thing that spoke of weakness, of a bloodline run dry. It made me less than nothing in a world where power was everything. My fingers tightened around the cool, familiar weight of the pendant hanging from a leather cord around my neck. It was a simple, elegant piece of silver, hammered into the shape of a delicate crescent moon, its surface worn smooth by the anxious caress of 3 generations of women in my family. It had been my grandmother Celiora's and her mother's before that. "This is your truth, little moonbeam," she had whispered to me the night she'd pressed it into my hand, her own scent of dried herbs and wood smoke a fading comfort. "Never forget that the moon does not need to roar to command the tides." I hadn't understood her then. I still didn't. Not really. Now her words were just a hollow echo against the loud, frantic beating of my own heart. The choosing was mandatory. Any unmated wolf of age was to present themselves before the visiting alphas, to be assessed, and, if deemed worthy, to be claimed. To refuse was to defy the pack, an act of treason. But to attend was a death sentence of another kind. The alphas who came to these regional choosings were often brutal, desperate for any viable female to strengthen their own packs. They would smell my deficiency in an instant. The best I could hope for was disgust and dismissal. The worst would be a cruel alpha taking me out of spite, a worthless prize to be used and discarded. My uncle, Lord Marius, who had been my guardian since my parents' passing, had made it clear that my presence was an embarrassment he would no longer tolerate. "You will be chosen tonight, Lysandra," he'd sneered, his own scent sharp with contempt, "or you will be cast out." I will not have a defective stain on my household any longer. So I ran. I fled to the one place no one would ever look for me, the edge of the blighted woods, a place of bad memories and twisted trees where, decades ago, the former Alpha King had been ambushed and killed. The pack avoided it, their instincts screaming of old blood and lingering sorrow. But to me, the sorrow was a shield. The rot was a cloak. A tremor ran through the packed earth above me. Not from the distant ceremony. This was closer. Heavier. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The faint scent of pine and damp soil was suddenly overwhelmed by something else. Something powerful and alive. It was a scent of unparalleled dominance, rich and complex like a storm rolling in over a forest. Pine, yes, but also crackling ozone, wet stone, and a deep, primal musk that spoke of a wolf so potent it made the air itself feel thick. It was a scent that promised both shelter and devastation. Panic, cold and sharp, speared through me. No one was supposed to be here. This place was taboo. I scrambled back, pressing myself against the damp stone wall of the cellar, my hand flying from my pendant to the hilt of the small skinning knife I'd brought with me. It was a pathetic weapon, a child's toy against the kind of power that scent proclaimed. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum trying to beat its way out of my chest. The heavy, deliberate footsteps stopped directly above me. 1 step, 2, then silence. An unnatural quiet fell, as if the very forest was holding its breath. The chirping of crickets ceased. The rustle of leaves died. There was only the roaring in my ears and that overwhelming, terrifying scent seeping through the floorboards like a rising tide. He knows. The thought was a shard of ice in my mind. He knows I'm here. The cellar door, a heavy slab of wood set into the floor of the cabin above, creaked. A sliver of moonlight cut through the darkness, pinning me like a startled moth. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying to a goddess I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. Let him not see me. Let him pass by. Let this be a nightmare. But the door was wrenched open with a groan of protesting hinges, flooding the small space with the pale, ethereal light of the full moon. A colossal silhouette blotted out the stars. He was a giant, a figure carved from shadow and mountain stone, his shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the entire entrance. I couldn't see his face, only the outline of his power. Then he spoke, and his voice was not a shout, but a low, resonant rumble that vibrated through the floorboards and up my spine. It was the sound of rocks grinding together deep within the earth. The hiding is over, little shadow. My breath hitched in a sob. I could do nothing but stare, paralyzed, as he descended the rickety ladder with an unnerving, predatory grace. Each step was controlled, deliberate, the movement of a predator that knows its prey is cornered and helpless. The scent intensified until it was all I could breathe, a dizzying, suffocating wave of pure alpha power. It stripped my defenses bare, leaving every nerve exposed and screaming. He reached the dirt floor, and the moonlight spilling from the opening above caught him, painting him in strokes of silver and gray. He was even larger up close, a monolith of muscle and authority clad in dark leathers. His hair was the color of a winter night, long and tied back from a face that was all harsh lines and stark plains. But it was his eyes that captured me, that held me in a grip of pure terror. They were the color of molten silver, glowing with an inner light, and they were fixed on me with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. They saw everything: my fear, my weakness, my brokenness. This was no regional alpha. This was no brute looking for a breeding vessel. The sheer, unassailable aura of command rolling off him in waves could belong to only one male: King Theron, the Shadow Wolf King, the ruler of all packs, a near mythical figure who hadn't been seen in these outlying territories for years. And he was here, in my miserable, stinking hole, looking at me. "You have led me on quite a chase," he said, his voice a soft growl that was somehow more intimidating than a roar. He took a slow step towards me. I flinched, pressing myself so hard against the stone wall that the damp grit bit into my skin. The useless little knife in my hand trembled. His silver eyes flickered down to the blade, and a flicker of something, not amusement, something darker, crossed his face. "That will not help you." He was only a few feet away now. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, see the faint shimmer of power in the air around him. My wolf, the pathetic, silent thing inside me, whimpered. It didn't want to fight. It wanted to roll over, to expose its throat, to submit entirely to the overwhelming presence of its king. "Please," I whispered, the word a ragged, pathetic sound. "I have nothing. I'm no one." King Theron stopped, tilting his head. His gaze was unnervingly perceptive, seeing far more than the trembling girl before him. His nostrils flared slightly, and I knew he was tasting my scent, my weak, watery, defective scent. I waited for the curl of his lip, the sneer of disgust. It was the reaction I always received, but it never came. Instead, his expression softened into something I couldn't decipher. It looked like recognition, like he had found something he had been searching for a very long time. "No," he murmured, his voice losing some of its gravelly edge, becoming something deeper, more resonant. You are not nothing. He took the final step, and the space between us vanished. He didn't touch me, but I was caged by his presence, enveloped in his scent. You are everything. His words made no sense. They were a disorienting blow, knocking the terror from my mind and replacing it with a profound, dizzying confusion. He reached out, his hand large enough to encircle my head, and I flinched violently, a choked gasp escaping my lips. His hand stopped, hovering in the air between us. I will not harm you, he said, and the sincerity in that deep voice was a shock. He held his hand there, patient, waiting. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Slowly, as if moving through water, I forced my gaze from his hand to his face. Look at me, he commanded, but it was a soft command, an invitation. My eyes met his. The silver of his irises seemed to swirl, to deepen. He wasn't looking at me with contempt or pity. He was looking at me with a raw, aching hunger that had nothing to do with cruelty and everything to do with a desperate, soul-deep need. It was the look of a man who had been starving for a lifetime and had just found a feast. Without breaking eye contact, he slowly lowered his hand and gently, so gently, brushed his knuckles against my cheek. His skin was warm and calloused, and a jolt, sharp and electric, shot through me at the contact. It wasn't painful. It wasn't frightening. It was grounding. The frantic panic inside me didn't vanish, but it stilled, anchored by his touch. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, a shudder running through his massive frame. His scent changed, the sharp edges of ozone and storm softening into something that smelled like warm earth after rain. When he opened his eyes again, the silver was brighter, fiercer. Your scent, he breathed, his voice thick with wonder. They said it was weak. They were fools. It is not weak. It is quiet. It is the quiet of the deep earth, the calm at the heart of the storm. He leaned closer, his forehead almost touching mine. It is the scent of an anchor. Anchor? The word meant nothing to me. It was a title from old legends, from stories told to pups about the first packs. A name for she-wolves who could soothe the most savage beast, who could hold a shifter's spirit steady through the violent torrent of the change. They were myths, bedtime stories. They had died out centuries ago. I don't understand, I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The little knife slipped from my numb fingers and clattered uselessly to the dirt floor. You will, he promised. He didn't question me about why I was hiding. He didn't interrogate me about my family or my status. It was as if he already knew all of it and had dismissed it as irrelevant. He straightened up, creating a sliver of space between us, though his scent still clung to me like a second skin. Come, you are not safe here. He turned and started towards the ladder, clearly expecting me to follow. The idea was ludicrous. Following him meant walking back into the world that had rejected me, but under the protection of the most powerful wolf in it. It meant facing my uncle, the pack, everything I had run from. But staying here suddenly felt like the more dangerous option. His scent lingered in the air, a promise of things I couldn't comprehend. He was a storm, and he had come for me. And when a storm comes, you can either be swept up in it or be destroyed in its path. My legs felt like lead, but I forced them to move. I took one shaky step, then another, following the king out of my dark, safe hole and into the terrifying, brilliant light of the moon. As I climbed the ladder, my hand brushed against the silver moon at my throat. It felt warm against my skin, as if it had absorbed the heat from his touch. For the first time in my life, the future was not a dark, empty void, but a blinding, unknown territory, and I was walking into it behind a king who looked at me like I was the only thing that could save him. The world outside the cellar was achingly beautiful and sharp under the full moon. Every leaf on the twisted trees of the blighted woods seemed to be etched in silver, every shadow a pool of deep velvet. King Theron stood waiting for me, his powerful form a stark silhouette against the luminous sky. He watched as I emerged from the ground, my clothes stained with dirt, my hair a mess of tangled knots. I must have looked like a wild thing, a creature born of the damp earth. He gestured to the path leading away from the crumbling cabin. Your uncle, Lord Marius, has been made aware that his search for you is no longer required. He was displeased. A low rumble vibrated in his chest, a sound of contained fury. His displeasure is of no consequence. You are under my protection now. The words hung in the air, a shield I had never dared to dream of. Under his protection, it sounded like a fantasy. My uncle's face flashed in my mind, his thin lips, his eyes cold with disdain. The thought of him facing this king, this mountain of raw power, sent a strange, vindictive thrill through me. Why? The question slipped out, small and fragile in the vast silence. Why me? Theron turned his silver gaze back to me. It was like being stared at by the moon itself. Because my pack is breaking, Lysandra. My warriors, the strongest alphas and betas in the territories, are fraying. Their shifts are becoming unstable. Their wolves more feral, harder to control. It is a sickness of the spirit, a madness that has been creeping into our blood for a generation. He spoke of it calmly, but I could feel the tension in him, the immense weight of the burden he carried. I had heard whispers, of course, rumors of border skirmishes ending with too much bloodshed, of wolves losing themselves to their rage and having to be put down. No one spoke of it openly. To do so would be to admit weakness, and weakness invited challenge. It began after the great ambush, when my father was killed, he continued, his voice dropping lower. Something was shattered that day. A balance was lost. For years, I have held us together with nothing but will and dominance. But my strength is not enough. The core is unraveling. We need an anchor. He looked at me, and the raw need in his eyes was a physical force. We need you. I shook my head, a gesture of pure, instinctual denial. But I'm broken. My wolf is silent. I can't even shift properly. You are not broken, he countered, his voice sharp with conviction. You are concentrated. Your power isn't meant to be spent on a physical form for yourself. It is meant to be a foundation for others. The moon speakers of old, the first anchors, they were often the same. Their gift was not in their own claws or teeth, but in their ability to soothe the souls of the entire pack, to be the calm center in the chaos of the change. Their scent was a balm, their presence a tether to sanity. He reached out again, this time not for my face but for the pendant at my throat. His large, calloused fingers brushed against my skin as he carefully lifted the silver crescent moon. He held it in his palm, his gaze fixed on it. This was your grandmother's? He asked. I nodded, unable to speak. Ciliora? He said, and the name on his lips sounded like a reverence. She was the last one we knew of. The last who carried the old knowledge. When she passed, we thought the line was extinguished forever. She hid you. She hid your scent, taught you how to suppress your own nature to keep you safe. The world had become too brutal for a gift like yours. It would have been seen as a weakness to be exploited, not a strength to be cherished. My mind reeled. My grandmother, she had known. Her cryptic words, her lessons in being quiet and unnoticed, her gift of the moon pendant. It wasn't to hide my shame, it was to protect my power. The self-perception I had carried my entire life, the belief that I was a defective, worthless Omega, was a lie. A lie told to keep me alive. A wave of grief and gratitude washed over me so intensely that my knees buckled. Theron's arm shot out, his hand wrapping around my waist, holding me steady. He pulled me against his side, his strength an unyielding wall. "Easy," he murmured, his voice a low vibration against my ear. "It is a great deal to comprehend." Pressed against him, I was enveloped in his scent, but it no longer felt threatening. It was still overwhelmingly powerful, but now it felt like a fortress. I could feel the steady, slow beat of his heart through the hard muscle of his chest. He was real. This was real. What do you want from me?" I asked, my voice muffled against his shoulder. He was silent for a long moment. "I am offering you a choice," he said finally, and I could feel the careful weight of his words. "A choice you have never been given. You can return to your life of hiding, and I will ensure no one ever bothers you again. You will be safe, but you will be alone. Or you can come with me to the capital. You can stand by my side. You can learn to wield the gift that is your birthright. And in doing so, you can save my people. Save me." The last two words were a whisper, a confession of vulnerability so profound it stole the air from my lungs. This was the Shadow Wolf King, a male whose power was legendary, admitting that he needed help. That he needed me. He released me and stepped back, giving me space. His silver eyes searched my face. "I will not force you, Lysandra. The power of an anchor cannot be commanded. It must be given freely. But know this. If you come with me, you will be more than just a protected guest. You will be honored. You will have a voice. And I will kill anyone who dares to disrespect you." The choice was no choice at all. Return to the shadows, to the lonely, fearful existence of a ghost, or step into the light, into a world of purpose and danger, at the side of a king who saw me not as broken, but as essential. My grandmother had hidden me so that I might one day be ready. Perhaps this was the day she had been preparing me for. I lifted my chin, my fear receding, replaced by a fragile, tentative shoot of hope. For the first time, I didn't feel like a broken Omega. I felt like Celiora's granddaughter. I felt like a moon speaker. "I will come with you," I said, and my voice did not tremble. It was clear and firm, a sound I barely recognized as my own. A slow smile touched King Theron's lips. It transformed his harsh face, erasing some of the lines of burden and revealing a glimpse of the male beneath the crown. The sight made my stomach flutter. "Good," he said, the single word resonating with profound relief. He offered me his arm, a formal, courtly gesture that seemed both strange and perfectly right in the moonlit woods. Hesitantly, I placed my hand on his forearm. The muscle beneath his leather sleeve was like solid rock. As my fingers made contact, a spark of energy, warm and pleasant, seemed to flow between us. His silver eyes flared, and I knew he felt it too. It was the feeling of two lost pieces clicking into place. "The path ahead will not be easy," he warned, his voice soft as we began to walk away from my old life. "There are those at court who will see you as a threat. They prefer the old ways of brutality and dominance. They will not understand your power. Let them try," I said, the newfound bravery still a surprise on my own tongue. Theron glanced down at me, and his smile widened. "Let them try," he agreed, his voice a low, dangerous growl. And as we walked, his presence beside me was a silent promise that whatever came, I would not be facing it alone. The scent of pine and storm was no longer the smell of fear. It was the smell of my future. The journey to the capital was a blur of speed and sensation. We didn't travel by carriage or on foot. Theron's royal guard, A dozen of the most formidable wolves I had ever seen met us at the edge of the woods. At a nod from their king, they shifted. The sound of it, the cracking of bones, the stretching of skin was usually terrifying, a violent symphony of transformation. But with Theron beside me, it was simply power, unleashed and controlled. Theron himself did not shift. He lifted me onto the back of his own warhorse, a massive black destrier with eyes as intelligent as any shifter's, and swung up behind me. His body was a solid wall of heat at my back, his arms caging me as he took the reins. "Hold on," he rumbled in my ear, and the command sent a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with fear. We rode through the night, a silent, ghostly procession moving faster than I thought possible. The king's scent enveloped me, a cocoon of power that kept the chill of the wind and the fear in my heart at bay. I leaned back into his strength, exhausted by the emotional upheaval of the night, and for the first time since I was a small child in my grandmother's lap, I felt safe enough to close my eyes. The capital, Silverwood Citadel, was not a city of stone and mortar. It was a living fortress, built into and around a grove of ancient colossal weirwood trees, whose bark shone like polished silver in the sun. Bridges of woven wood and living vines connected massive platforms built high in the branches. Waterfalls cascaded from pools nestled in the canopy, their spray catching the light and creating perpetual rainbows. It was breathtakingly beautiful, a testament to the harmony between the pack and the natural world. It was also terrifying. As we entered the city, wolves in their human forms stopped and stared. Their scents filled the air, a complex tapestry of curiosity, suspicion, and deference to their king. But as their eyes fell on me, perched in front of him, the scents shifted. I could smell their confusion, their disdain. My own watery, weak scent must have been an insult, a jarringly wrong note in their powerful symphony. I instinctively tried to make myself smaller, to shrink into the king's shadow. Theron's arm tightened around my waist, a silent message of support. "Pay them no mind," he murmured, his voice for my ears alone. "They are like children who have forgotten the old songs. You will teach them to remember." He led me to the heart of the citadel, to the king's own dwelling, a magnificent structure carved into the trunk of the largest weirwood, the heartwood. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of beeswax, polished wood, and the ever-present personal scent of the king himself. He handed me over to a tall, stern-faced beta with streaks of gray in his dark hair. "Gideon," Theron said, his voice all command once more. "This is Lysandra. She is to be given the Luna's traditional quarters. See to it that she has everything she needs. She is my guest, and her comfort is your highest priority." The beta, Gideon, looked from the king to me, his expression unreadable but his scent sharp with surprise. The Luna's quarters? They had been empty for a generation since the death of Theron's mother. To place me there was a statement so bold it bordered on madness. "Your Majesty," Gideon began, his voice hesitant, "the council will be informed of my decision at the evening meal." Theron cut him off, his tone leaving no room for argument. His silver eyes then softened as they met mine. "Rest, Lysandra. A handmaiden will be sent to you. We will speak again later." He gave me a curt nod and strode away, his powerful presence leaving a vacuum in its wake. Gideon led me in stiff silence through halls of gleaming wood to a set of large carved doors. He pushed them open and gestured me inside. "The handmaiden, Kalairin, will be along shortly." He bowed stiffly and departed, leaving me alone. The rooms were beautiful. A circular sitting room with panoramic windows looked out over the entire citadel. A bedroom held a bed so large it could have slept four, piled high with furs. A bathing chamber had a deep, sunken pool fed by a natural hot spring. It was a gilded cage, and I had never felt more out of place. I walked to the windows, wrapping my arms around myself. Below, the life of the capital buzzed, full of powerful, complete beings. And here I was, the broken Omega, placed at its very center. A short while later, a soft knock came at the door. A young woman with warm brown eyes and a friendly, open scent of fresh bread and chamomile entered. "My name is Caliran, my lady," she said with a small, curious smile. "The king sent me." Her presence was a small comfort in this overwhelming place. She helped me bathe and wash the grime of the cellar from my hair. She brought me clean clothes, not the rough spun wool I was used to, but soft, flowing tunics of deep green and gray that somehow made me look less like a waif and more like someone. "The whole citadel is talking," Caliran said, her voice low as she brushed my damp hair. "No one understands." The king returned from the choosing well, with you, not with a high-born alpha female from a strong bloodline. She paused. "Lord Valerius and his daughter arrived this morning." Everyone assumed the king would finally form an alliance with the Stone Ridge Pack. The name Valerius sent a chill through me. His pack was known for its adherence to the old, brutal ways. "His daughter?" I asked. "Lady Cyrilda," Caliran supplied, her nose wrinkling slightly. "She's very beautiful. And she has made it no secret that she intends to be the next queen." As if summoned by the words, a commotion sounded from the main hall. A voice, sharp and imperious, carried through the thick wooden door. "I wish to see her." The king cannot be serious. A scentless, no-name Omega in the Luna's chambers? It's an insult. Caliran's eyes widened in alarm. "Lady Cyrilda," she whispered. Before either of us could react, the doors were pushed open and a woman swept in. Cyrilda was everything I was not. She was tall and statuesque, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes as blue and cold as glacial ice. Her scent was strong and spicy, a bold declaration of her pure alpha lineage. She was flanked by two other high-born women who looked at me as if I were something they had scraped off their boot. Cyrilda's gaze raked over me, from my bare feet on the wooden floor to my simple tunic. A slow, malicious smile spread across her perfect lips. "So, this is the little stray the king dragged home," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "I must say I'm unimpressed. You smell of nothing, damp leaves and fear. Tell me, what parlor tricks did you use to catch his eye?" I flinched, my newfound courage deserting me in the face of her polished cruelty. I felt myself shrinking again, the broken Omega she saw me as. My mouth opened, but no words came out. "Leave her be," Caliran said, stepping forward slightly, her loyalty surprising me. Cyrilda laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. "And who is this? The serving girl, defending the charity case? How touching." She took a step closer to me, her powerful scent a suffocating wave. "Let me give you some advice, little thing. Whatever game you are playing, it is over. The king needs a strong queen, a true Luna to bear him powerful heirs, not a defective pet. You are a temporary amusement. Go back to whatever hovel you crawled out of before you embarrass yourself further." Tears of humiliation pricked at my eyes. Her words were a mirror of every fear, every insecurity I had ever had. She was right. What was I doing here? What could I possibly offer a king? But then, I felt it. A flicker of heat from the pendant at my throat. I heard my grandmother's voice in my memory. "The moon does not need to roar to command the tides." I remembered the look in Theron's eyes. "You are not nothing. You are everything." I took a deep breath, drawing in Cyrilda's aggressive, spicy scent, and beneath it, I smelled something else. A faint, acrid undertone of anxiety, a desperation to secure her position. She wasn't just confident, She was grasping. I lifted my head and met her icy blue eyes. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. The king has asked me to be here, my lady. If you have an issue with his decision, I suggest you take it up with him. Cyrilda's smile faltered, her eyes narrowing in surprise at my defiance. She had expected me to crumble. You have a tongue, then, she hissed, her scent flaring with anger. Let's see how brave you are when you are standing before the entire court tonight. They will see you for what you are, a nobody. And he will see it too. She turned on her heel, her companions trailing behind her like vultures, and swept out of the room, leaving a trail of smug, venomous energy in her wake. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my body trembling with reaction. I had spoken up. I hadn't cowered. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. My lady, Caliran breathed, her eyes wide with awe. No one speaks to Lady Cyrilda like that. I touched the moon pendant, its silver cool against my trembling fingers. I'm starting to think I'm not who I thought I was, I whispered, more to myself than to her. The evening meal loomed before me, a trial by fire. Cyrilda was right about one thing: the entire court would be watching, and I would have to find the strength to be more than the broken Omega they all expected to see. The hours leading up to the evening meal were a torment of anxiety. Caliran helped me dress in a simple but elegant gown of deep silver-gray silk that shimmered like moonlight on water. It made my pale skin and dark hair seem less drab and more ethereal. She wove my hair into a complex braid, leaving the crescent moon pendant visible at the hollow of my throat. But no amount of fine clothing could quell the storm in my stomach. I was about to face a room full of alphas and betas, wolves whose very scents proclaimed their superiority, all while standing next to their king. When Gideon arrived to escort me, his face was as grim as a tombstone. His scent was tight with disapproval. He clearly believed the king was making a grave error. He led me through winding corridors to the Great Hall, a vast open-air chamber on one of the highest platforms of the Heartwood. The ceiling was the living canopy of the tree itself, hung with glowing lanterns that mimicked the stars. A massive table, carved from a single slab of weirwood, dominated the space, already surrounded by the most powerful members of the pack. The moment I entered on Gideon's arm, a hush fell over the room. Dozens of pairs of eyes turned to me. The collective force of their stares was a physical blow. The air, already thick with the scents of roasted meat and mulled wine, became a chaotic jumble of shifter scents: pride, suspicion, hostility, and raw, predatory curiosity. It was a wall of sensory information that made my head spin. I felt my own weak scent shrink and wither under the onslaught, and the familiar shame washed over me. At the head of the table, King Theron sat on a throne-like chair carved with the image of a snarling wolf. To his right, in the seat of honor traditionally reserved for the Luna or a favored guest, was Lady Cyrilda. She was radiant in a gown of crimson silk, her golden hair piled high, a triumphant smirk on her face. She had positioned herself exactly where she believed she belonged. Her father, Lord Valerius, a hard-faced man with a cruel twist to his mouth and a scent like cold iron and blood, sat beside her. He caught my eye and gave me a look of utter contempt. Theron's gaze found mine across the room. His face was unreadable, a mask of sovereign authority. But for a fleeting second, I saw his silver eyes flare, and I felt a faint echo of his power reach for me across the hall, a silent question. "Are you all right?" I gave a barely perceptible nod, though my heart was hammering. Gideon led me not to the main table but to a smaller secondary table set for lower-ranking pack members and servants. The humiliation was a fresh sting. This was my place then, with the nobodies. Cyrilda's smirk widened into a victorious smile. She had won this round. I took my seat, my eyes fixed on the wooden grain of the table before me, trying to block out the stares and the whispers that had started to ripple through the hall. An Omega. Can't even smell her. What is the king thinking? Theron rose to his feet. A profound silence immediately fell over the hall. His presence was absolute. Tonight, we have guests, he began, his voice resonating through the chamber. Lord Valerius of the Stoneridge Pack, and his daughter, Lady Cyrilda. He gave them a nod, which they returned. They are here to discuss an alliance, one that could strengthen our borders. He paused, and his silver eyes swept the room before landing once again on me. The entire hall followed his gaze. I felt like a bug under a magnifying glass. We also have a new guest in the Citadel, he continued, his voice steady and strong. Lysandra. She has come at my personal invitation and is to be afforded every courtesy and respect. She is under my direct protection. A murmur went through the crowd. His words were a clear warning, but my placement at the lower table contradicted them. It was a confusing signal. Lord Valerius leaned over and whispered something to Cyrilda, who laughed, a sound that was both delicate and sharp. The meal began, a tense, formal affair. I couldn't eat. Every bite felt like ash in my mouth. I kept my head down, focusing on the warmth of the pendant against my skin, trying to remember the king's words in the cellar, the calm at the heart of the storm. But I felt nothing like calm. I felt like a lamb in a den of wolves. Halfway through the meal, Lord Valerius stood up, a goblet of wine in his hand. King Theron, he began, his voice a gravelly boom. We speak of alliances and strength. A strong pack needs a strong Luna, a true alpha female to stand by your side and produce heirs worthy of your line. His eyes flicked to his daughter, then dismissively towards me. Strength must be met with strength, not with weakness. The challenge was unmistakable, a direct slight against Theron's judgment and, by extension, me. The air grew thick with tension. The sense of the alphas at the table sharpened with aggression, their wolves rising close to the surface. Theron placed his own goblet down with a soft, deliberate click. He didn't rise. He didn't need to. He pinned Valerius with a look of cold, lethal stillness. My pack's strength, he said, his voice dangerously quiet, and the matter of who stands by my side are not subjects for public debate, my lord. Cyrilda, seeing her father falter, quickly intervened, her voice like honeyed poison. My father means no disrespect, your majesty. He is simply a traditionalist. He believes, as do many, that the old ways are best. That a pack is only as strong as the bloodlines that lead it. She gave a tinkling, false laugh. Surely you are not considering elevating a foundling to a position of any importance. It would be a catastrophic sign of instability. The word hung in the air. Instability. It was the one thing Theron could not afford to show. It was the very sickness he was trying to cure. This was it. This was the moment I would either break or find the truth in his words. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head again. The moon does not need to roar. I didn't have their power, their scent, their physical strength. But maybe I had something else. Slowly, I pushed my chair back and stood up. Every eye in the hall swiveled to me. I could feel Caliron's panicked scent from a few seats away. My hands were trembling, but I clasped them in front of me. I looked not at Cyrilda or Valerius, but at King Theron. Your Majesty, I said, my voice clearer and louder than I expected. Lord Valerius and Lady Cyrilda speak of strength. But there are different kinds of strength, are there not? I paused, letting my own question hang in the air. There is the strength of the storm, which breaks trees and floods rivers. It is loud and powerful, and no one can deny it. I glanced at Valerius and the other aggressive alphas. But there is also the strength of the mountain, which stands silent and unmoving, and guides the path of the storm around it. There is the strength of the deep roots of this very tree, which hold it fast against the wind. They are not loud, but without them, the entire canopy would fall. My voice grew steadier with every word, fueled by a conviction I didn't know I possessed. A pack built only on the strength of storms will eventually tear itself apart. It needs roots. It needs a foundation. That, I believe, is a strength worth having. I finished, my heart pounding, my breath held tight in my chest. I had spoken. I had challenged their entire worldview. Silence. A deep, profound silence filled the hall. The alphas were staring at me, their expressions no longer just contemptuous, but confused, thoughtful. I had given them a riddle, a new idea to turn over in their predators' minds. Then, Theron did something that shocked the entire court. He smiled, a slow, genuine smile of pure, unadulterated pride. He rose from his throne, and the sound of his chair scraping back was deafening in the quiet. He walked around the great table, past a stunned Cyrilda, his eyes never leaving my face. He stopped in front of me, in the space between the high table and the low. The entire pack watched, holding its breath. He extended his hand to me. "Lysandra," he said, his voice now a warm, rich timbre that resonated through the hall, a public proclamation. "You have been sitting at the wrong table." My breath hitched. I placed my trembling hand in his. His grip was warm and firm, a solid anchor in the swirling sea of scents and stares. He led me from the lower table, past the gawking courtiers, and brought me to the head of the hall. He did not lead me to the empty chair on his other side. Instead, he stopped beside Cyrilda. He looked down at her, his face once again an impassive mask, but his eyes were chips of ice. "Lady Cyrilda," he said, his voice utterly flat, "you are in her seat." The gasp that went through the hall was a collective shock. Cyrilda's face went from triumphant crimson to stark white. The color drained from her cheeks, and for the first time her scent was not of spicy confidence, but of sharp, bitter humiliation. She stared up at him, speechless. "Get up," he commanded, the words low and laced with steel. Shaking with fury and embarrassment, Cyrilda slowly rose from the Luna's seat. Theron did not wait for her to move away. He simply pulled the chair out and gestured for me to sit. Numbly, I did. He then pushed the chair in, placing me at his right hand, in the one seat that signified more than any other. He remained standing behind me for a moment, his hands resting on the back of my chair, a clear, possessive, and undeniable statement of placement. He had not just defended me, he had elevated me, in front of everyone. "Let the meal continue," he announced, his voice booming with renewed authority. But no one moved. They just stared at me, the broken Omega, the girl who smelled of nothing, now sitting in the Luna's chair. And in the oppressive silence, I knew that this was not the end of the conflict. It was only the beginning. The rest of the evening meal passed in a haze of tension so thick I felt I could choke on it. Cyrilda had been forced to take a seat further down the table, her face a frozen mask of fury, her scent a poisonous cloud of rage and humiliation that I could feel even from a distance. Her father, Lord Valerius, stared at me with open hatred, his knuckles white where he gripped his goblet. I had not made an enemy, I had made a nemesis. I sat beside Theron, a plate of exquisite food untouched before me. His proximity was a strange comfort. His scent, that powerful blend of pine and storm, acted as a buffer, pushing back the hostile waves of animosity from the rest of the table. He didn't speak to me, but occasionally his arm would brush against mine, a small grounding contact that reminded me I wasn't alone. He was letting his actions speak for him, and they were speaking volumes. When the meal finally concluded, Theron stood and addressed the hall one last time. "Lord Valerius, we will discuss the terms of our potential alliance on the morrow. I trust you and your daughter will find your guest quarters comfortable." His tone was layered with dismissal. He then turned to me, his expression softening almost imperceptibly. "Lysandra, walk with me." It was a command, but it felt like a rescue. I rose, my legs unsteady, and followed him from the great hall, leaving the whispers and the venomous stares behind. He led me not back to my chambers, but along a winding, open-air walkway towards the outer edge of the citadel. The cool night air was a relief, clearing my head. We came to a quiet, secluded garden platform, bathed in the silver light of the moon. A small fountain gurgled in the center, and the air smelled of night-blooming moon-petal flowers, a sweet, calming fragrance. Theron stopped and turned to me, his great height and broad shoulders blocking out the view of the citadel below. We were enclosed in our own private world. "You are magnificent," he said, his voice a low rumble of approval. "You spoke the truth of our nature, a truth many of them have forgotten." I was terrified, I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. My heart was beating so fast I thought it would break. "Fear is not weakness," he countered, taking a step closer. "To feel fear and act anyway, that is the definition of courage." He reached out and gently tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His fingers were warm against my skin, and the familiar jolt, the spark of connection, danced between us. "You did not let them break you." "They wanted to," I murmured, thinking of Cyrilda's cruel words. She said I was a defective pet, a temporary amusement. A low, dangerous growl vibrated in Theron's chest. The air around him seemed to crackle with contained violence, and for a second, his silver eyes flashed a burning, predatory amber. The scent of ozone and storm intensified. "No one will ever call you that again," he swore, his voice thick with fury. "I will have her tongue for it." "No," I said quickly, placing my hand on his arm. "Please, that would only prove her point, that I'm weak and need you to fight my battles." He looked down at my hand on his arm, then back to my face. The amber in his eyes receded, replaced by the cool, molten silver once more. He took a deep, calming breath, and the oppressive power in the air lessened. "You are wise as well as brave," he said, his voice softening. He covered my hand with his own, his large palm engulfing my fingers. "But their challenge will not end with words. Valerius is an old wolf who believes power is taken, never given. He sees my desire to heal our pack as a weakness. He will try to prove it." As if his words were a prophecy, a sudden commotion erupted from the direction of the training grounds below us. A sharp, agonized howl cut through the night, followed by shouts of alarm. It was the sound of a wolf in pain, a shift gone wrong. Theron's head snapped up, his entire body going rigid. "What is this?" he snarled. Without another word, he turned and sprinted towards the sound, his movements impossibly fast. I hesitated for only a second before running after him. We arrived at the training grounds, a large, flattened dirt arena, to a scene of chaos. A circle of guards, Gideon among them, were trying to contain a young wolf. He was caught halfway through a shift, a grotesque, agonized fusion of boy and beast. One arm was elongated, ending in blackened claws, while the rest of his body was still human, contorted in pain. His howls were screams of pure agony, and his scent was a terrifying mix of panic and the sour smell of a spirit tearing itself apart. He was one of the fraying ones Theron had spoken of. Standing at the edge of the circle, watching with cold satisfaction, were Lord Valerius and Cyrilda. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that they had orchestrated this. They had likely provoked the young, unstable wolf, goading him into a shift he couldn't control, all to publicly display the king's weakness. "Get back! He's losing control," Gideon yelled as the boy wolf thrashed, his eyes rolling back in his head. The guards were hesitant to use force on one of their own, but they were being pushed back by the volatile, unpredictable energy radiating from him. Theron moved to intervene, his own power rising to force the boy into submission. But I could see the conflict in him. To dominate the boy now might save him, but it could also shatter his already fragile spirit forever. It was the brutal solution, the very thing he was trying to move his pack away from. And then, something inside me shifted. It wasn't my wolf. It was something deeper. Watching the boy's agony, seeing the cold triumph on Valerius's face, a wave of protective instinct, fierce and powerful, surged through me. This was not a political game. This was a child in pain. I didn't think. I acted. I pushed past a stunned guard and walked into the circle. "Lysandra! No!" Theron's voice was a roar of alarm. But I didn't listen. I walked slowly towards the convulsing figure. The air around him was electric with pain and chaos. He snarled at me, a wet, guttural sound, his malformed claw swiping wildly. I didn't flinch. I kept my eyes on his, looking past the beast to the terrified boy within. I remembered my grandmother's stories. The moon speakers didn't command. They soothed. They didn't shout. They sang. I opened my mouth, and a sound I had never made before emerged. It wasn't a word. It was a note. A low, resonant hum, like the vibration of a silver bell. It was the sound of my own soul, a melody I hadn't known I possessed. My pendant grew warm against my skin, pulsing with a soft, gentle light that only I could feel. The effect was instantaneous. The young wolf's thrashing stilled. His agonized howling softened into a confused whimper. He turned his tortured face towards me, his eyes focusing for the first time. The chaotic energy around him calmed, the violent storm within him finding its center. I took another step, still humming that low, steady note. My own scent, usually so faint, began to change. It bloomed, deepening from watery nothingness into something rich and profound. It smelled of night-blooming flowers, of clean rain, of the deep, quiet earth, and of moonlight itself. It was the scent of absolute calm, of sanctuary. It washed over the boy, and a great shuddering sigh went through him. "It's all right," I whispered, my voice woven into the humming note. "Be still. You are safe. Find your center. Breathe." Slowly, miraculously, the transformation reversed. The elongated arm shrank back to its human proportions, the claws receding into fingernails. The feral cast of his features softened. With a final ragged gasp, he collapsed to the ground, fully human again, trembling and weeping but whole. Silence. The entire training ground was utterly, profoundly silent. The guards stared, their weapons lowered, their faces a mask of disbelief. Gideon's mouth was hanging open. Lord Valerius and Cyrilda looked as if they had been struck by lightning, their expressions of triumph replaced with shock and a dawning horror. They had meant to expose a weakness, and instead, they had revealed a power they could not comprehend. I swayed on my feet, the strength draining out of me as quickly as it had come. The world tilted, the sounds of the night rushing back in. My hum faltered and died. The effort had taken everything from me. Before I could fall, strong arms were around me, lifting me as if I weighed nothing. I looked up into King Theron's face. His silver eyes were blazing, not with anger, but with a fierce, possessive awe that stole my breath away. He held me against his chest, his hold both protective and reverent. "An anchor," he breathed, his voice thick with emotion as he looked from me to the now sobbing boy on the ground, then to the stunned faces of the crowd. He had believed it. He had told me what I was. But now, he had seen it. And so had they all. He turned his blazing gaze on Valerius. The king's scent exploded from him, a tidal wave of dominant, furious power that made every wolf in the arena, myself included, flinch. It was the scent of a king whose patience had finally, irrevocably, snapped. You, Theron snarled, his voice a low, lethal promise of violence. You have made a grave mistake. He held me tighter against him, a clear declaration. I was not just under his protection. I was his, and they had just threatened what was his. The game was over. A war had just begun. Theron carried me from the training grounds, his long, powerful strides eating up the distance back to the Heartwood. He didn't say a word, but the fury rolling off him was a palpable force. The guards we passed flattened themselves against the walls, their heads bowed, their sense laced with fear. They weren't afraid of me. They were terrified of the king's wrath, which I was now the focus of. He didn't take me back to the Luna's chambers. He strode past those doors and into his own royal wing, a section of the citadel I hadn't seen. The air here was even more saturated with his scent, a pure, undiluted concentration of his power. He pushed open the door to his private study and carried me inside. The room was Spartan and masculine, dominated by a massive desk carved from dark wood and shelves overflowing with scrolls and leather-bound books. A low fire crackled in a stone hearth, casting flickering shadows on the walls. He finally set me down, not on a chair, but on a plush fur rug before the fire, his movements surprisingly gentle. I felt utterly drained, my limbs heavy, my mind a foggy haze. The manifestation of my power had been completely instinctual, and the backlash left me feeling hollowed out. Theron knelt in front of me, his huge frame seeming to fill the room. He reached out, his thumb gently stroking my cheek. His silver eyes were dark with a maelstrom of emotions, anger, awe, and a fierce, terrifying protectiveness. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a low, rough murmur. I shook my head weakly. Just tired. "What you did?" He started, then stopped, searching for words. "I have only read of such things in the oldest texts. To see it, to feel it. When you sang, the chaos in the air just ceased. You didn't command it. You healed it." He looked at me with an intensity that made my skin tingle. "You are more powerful than I even imagined." He stood and paced before the fire like a caged wolf, his rage from the training ground still simmering just beneath the surface. "Valerius will pay for that. To use a young pup, to deliberately push him to the breaking point for a political display, it is an unforgivable dishonor." "He didn't know," I said, my voice still faint. "He couldn't have known what I could do." "No one did." "He knew the boy was unstable," Theron countered, stopping to look down at me. "He gambled with a young life. That is not the way of our people. It is the way of tyrants and madmen." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture of deep frustration. "This fraying, this sickness of the spirit, it makes us vulnerable to wolves like him. He sees our struggle to evolve beyond pure brutality as weakness, and he wants to drag us all back into the bloody past." He grew quiet then, his gaze lost in the dancing flames. The anger in him subsided, replaced by a profound weariness. The weight of his crown, of his entire nation, seemed to settle on his broad shoulders. "When I was young," he began, his voice dropping into a confessional tone, "not much older than the boy you just saved, I was with my father's hunting party in the blighted woods. We were ambushed." He spoke of it as if it were yesterday, the memory raw and vivid. "They were rogues, wolves cast out from other packs, driven mad by isolation. They fought with no honor, no code. It was a slaughter. I saw my father, the king, torn down. I felt his spirit link to the pack sever. He closed his eyes, a muscle working in his jaw. I survived. I was found days later, barely alive, having fought my way out of the wilderness. But something broke inside me that day. I ascended to the throne with a rage in my heart so fierce I could barely control my own wolf. For years, that rage was all that held the pack together after my father's death. I ruled through fear and dominance because it was the only way I knew. It was what saved me in those woods. He opened his eyes and they were filled with a deep, haunting sorrow. But a pack cannot live on fear forever. The rage that saved me began to poison us. It's the source of the fraying. I can feel it in them because it started in me. I have been trying for years to find a different way, a better way, but I don't know how to heal a wound that is a part of my own soul. His confession laid him bare. The intimidating Shadow Wolf King, the fearsome ruler, was just a man haunted by a trauma he couldn't escape, desperately trying to save his people from his own demons. My heart ached for him, for the boy who had watched his father die and had to become a monster to survive. I pushed myself up onto my knees. "You are not a monster, Theron," I whispered, using his name for the first time. He looked at me, his silver eyes wide with surprise. He knelt again, bringing us face to face. "When you are near," he said, his voice thick with a raw vulnerability that humbled me, "the rage quiets. The storm inside me finds its center. Tonight, when you sang to that boy, I felt it too. A moment of perfect, absolute peace. Something I have not felt since I was a child." He reached out, his hand cupping my jaw, his thumb stroking the line of my throat just above my pendant. His touch was electric, sending a cascade of warmth through my veins. The weariness that had settled deep in my bones began to recede, replaced by a different kind of energy, a thrumming awareness of him, of the space between us. "Don't hide from me, Lysandra," he murmured, the words a soft plea. His eyes searched mine, looking for something beyond the power I held. He was looking for me. "Don't ever hide from me again." My breath caught. The command, once a tool to quell my fear, was now an invitation to intimacy. He wasn't just the king anymore. He was Theron, a man who was just as broken, in his own way, as I had once believed myself to be. "I won't," I promised, my voice husky. The space between us seemed to shrink, charged with a tension that was no longer about power or politics, but something far more ancient and elemental. His gaze dropped to my lips. The air grew heavy, thick with his scent, and the unspoken question that hung between us. He leaned in, his movements slow, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I leaned forward, meeting him halfway. His lips met mine. The kiss was not gentle. It was a collision of storm and calm, of desperation and hope. It was filled with years of loneliness, of the burden of his crown, and the sudden, explosive relief of being truly seen. His taste was of wine and wildness, and I opened to him, my hands coming up to tangle in his long, dark hair. He groaned, a low, guttural sound deep in his chest, and his arm snaked around my waist, pulling me flush against him. He shifted his weight, gathering me into his lap without breaking the kiss. I was surrounded by him, by his strength, by his scent, by his need. It wasn't frightening. It was like coming home to a place I had never known existed. This was not the forced claiming I had feared, the brutal taking of an alpha. This was a meeting of equals, of two fractured souls finding their missing pieces in each other. His power called to my calm, and my calm answered his power. When he finally broke the kiss, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his silver eyes glowing in the firelight. "You are mine," he growled, the words a possessive, primal declaration. But they were not a threat. They were a vow. My anchor. My peace. He paused, his gaze softening. "My Lysandra." "And you are mine," I replied, the words feeling more true than anything I had ever said. I was no longer Lysandra, the broken Omega. I was the Moon Speaker. I was his. And he, the Shadow Wolf King, was mine. In the heart of the citadel, with enemies gathering at the gates, we had found our own sanctuary in each other. The days that followed were a strange mixture of quiet intimacy and rising tension. Theron moved me officially into the Luna's chambers, but I spent more time with him in his study or walking the high garden paths than I did in my own opulent rooms. He was true to his word. He began to teach me, sharing ancient texts about the moon speakers, helping me to understand the gift that flowed in my veins. It was not a power to be wielded like a weapon, but a presence to be nurtured, an empathy that could be focused and projected. He showed me how to feel the emotional state of the pack, the subtle currents of fear, aggression, and loyalty that flowed through the citadel like an invisible river. With him, I felt my own strength grow. The quiet at my core became a deep, steady reservoir. My scent, once a source of shame, settled into its new form, a constant, subtle fragrance of calm that other wolves were beginning to notice. Servants who had once avoided my gaze now offered small, shy smiles. Guards straightened a little taller when I passed, their own sense smoothing out from sharp anxiety to steady readiness. I was changing them, one quiet interaction at a time. Our own bond deepened with every shared meal, every late-night conversation by the fire. The physical intimacy that had begun with that first desperate kiss evolved into something more profound. It was in the way he would reach for my hand as we walked, his large fingers lacing through mine. It was in the way he would pull me back against his chest when we stood looking out over the valley, his chin resting on the top of my head. He was a deeply possessive male, his wolf constantly demanding proximity, but his possession was a shield, not a cage. With every touch, every shared glance, he was anchoring me as much as I was anchoring him. But outside our growing bubble of connection, the citadel was a pot simmering on the verge of boiling over. Lord Valerius and Cyrilda remained as honored guests, a euphemism for political prisoners. They were confined to their quarters, but their influence was a poison seeping through the court. Valerius had powerful allies, traditionalists who saw Theron's new direction and his favor towards me as a betrayal of their heritage. Whispers grew louder. They called me the Omega Witch and the King's Puppet. Cyrilda used her network of high-born ladies to spread rumors that I had enchanted the king, that my strange powers were a dark magic that would be the pack's undoing. The final confrontation came, as I knew it must, on the night of the next full moon. The moon held deep significance for our people, a time of immense power when the veil between human and wolf was at its thinnest. It was also the traditional time for challenges of leadership to be issued and met. That evening, Theron called a formal gathering in the Great Hall. It was not a feast this time, but a solemn assembly. The air was electric with anticipation. Everyone knew something was about to break. I stood by Theron's side, not in a chair, but on the dais with him. He had dressed me in a gown of the purest white, the silk so fine it seemed to float around me. My silver moon pendant was my only adornment. He himself was clad in black leather, a stark and formidable figure. He held my hand, his grip firm and steady, our linked hands a public symbol of our unity. He began by addressing the fraying. For the first time, a king spoke openly of his pack's weakness. He spoke of the rage, the instability, and the fear. He did not offer excuses, only the truth. For too long, we have mistaken brutality for strength, he declared, his voice ringing with conviction. We have honored the storm and forgotten the mountain. We have allowed our spirits to become unmoored. Then he turned his gaze on me. But the goddess has not abandoned us. She has returned to us a gift we thought was lost forever. She has given us an anchor. He raised our joined hands. Lysandra is a moon speaker, a descendant of the ancient line that once formed the very heart of our people. Her presence is not a weakness. It is our salvation. Lies. The shout came from Lord Valerius, who strode into the center of the hall, his face purple with rage. He had defied his confinement. Cyrilda followed a pace behind him, her expression one of cold, calculated venom. This is not a gift from the goddess. It is a curse. Valerius bellowed, pointing a trembling finger at me. She is a defective Omega who has used some unnatural sorcery to bewitch our king. She weakens him. She weakens us all. Look at him, speaking of feelings and healing. Where is the mighty Shadow Wolf King? I see only a man led by his desires for a worthless stray. A number of the older, more conservative alphas grumbled in agreement, their sense turning sharp and aggressive. They were swayed by Valerius's appeal to the old ways. I challenge you, Theron, Valerius roared, formally issuing the ultimate defiance. I challenge you for the throne. Let the moon be our witness. Let our wolves decide who is fit to lead. Theron's face was a mask of cold fury. I accept your challenge, Valerius, he said, his voice dropping to a lethal calm. But you are mistaken. This is not a challenge for the throne. This is your trial. You stand accused of treason, of endangering the life of a pack member, and of attempting to usurp the authority of your king. The punishment is death. He released my hand and stepped forward, descending from the dais. As he walked towards the center of the hall, he began to unfasten his leather tunic. The crowd gasped and fell back, clearing a large space. A challenge under the full moon was to be decided by the wolf, and the wolf alone. Valerius laughed, a harsh, grating sound. So, the wolf still has teeth. Good. He too began to strip, his aging but still powerful body preparing for the change. Panic seized me. This was what he wanted. A brutal, physical confrontation. Even if Theron won, it would be a victory won through the very violence he was trying to leave behind. It would prove Valerius's point. As the two alphas faced each other, the light of the full moon streamed in through the open ceiling of the hall. It was a beam of pure, concentrated silver, and it fell directly upon me. And then, the world changed. The pendant at my throat flared with a light so brilliant it was blinding, not warm this time, but a cool, intense silver that pulsed in time with my heart. The light didn't just come from the pendant, it came from me. A soft, intricate silver marking, like glowing moonlight woven into lace, bloomed across my skin, tracing its way up my throat, over my cheeks, and onto my forehead, where it formed a perfect, shining crescent moon. The scent that exploded from me was no longer just calming. It was ancient. It was a scent of absolute authority, of primal lunar power. It was the scent of the First Mother, the original Luna, the goddess herself made manifest. Every wolf in the room, from the lowest Omega to the alphas preparing for battle, fell to their knees as one. Their wolves, their very souls, recognized a power far older and greater than that of any alpha king. Theron and Valerius, both frozen mid-transformation, stared at me, their human eyes wide with utter shock and awe. The raw, animalistic power of the imminent change was snuffed out, doused by the tidal wave of my authority. I was no longer Lysandra. I was the Silver Luna, a legend made real. I walked down from the dais, the silk of my white gown pooling around my feet, the silver light radiating from me. I did not feel fear. I did not feel anger. I felt only a vast, serene certainty. I was the moon, and they were the tides. I stopped before the two stunned alphas. I looked at Lord Valerius, his face a mixture of terror and disbelief. "There will be no more bloodshed in this hall," I said, and my voice was not my own. It was layered, melodic, echoing with the power of the generations of moon speakers before me. It was not a request. It was a decree. His wolf, a creature of pure aggression, whimpered and bowed to mine, even from within his human form. He could not fight it. He could not fight me. Then I turned to Theron. He was staring at me, his face stripped of all its royal authority, revealing only the man. His silver eyes were filled with a reverence so profound it made my heart ache. He saw me. He saw all of me. The broken girl, the brave woman, and the ancient power that now wore my face. I reached out and placed my glowing hand on his chest, directly over his heart. "The reign of rage is over, Theron," I said, my voice softening, becoming my own again, though the power still thrummed through it. "It is time to heal." He covered my hand with his, a shudder running through his entire body. He bowed his head, not in submission to a superior, but in acknowledgement of a partner, an equal. "My Luna," he breathed, the words a prayer. In that moment, everything was settled. Valerius's challenge was broken, his power shattered not by claws and teeth, but by a power he could never comprehend. The pack had not just seen a king defended, they had witnessed the return of their heart. The silver light on my skin slowly faded, the overwhelming scent of authority receding back to the calm fragrance of my own soul. I was Lysandra again, but I was irrevocably changed. I was no longer hiding in the shadows. I was the light. Theron straightened up, his eyes never leaving mine. He turned to the stunned, kneeling court. "Behold," he said, his voice ringing with a new kind of strength, not of a tyrant, but of a king who had found his queen. "Behold your Luna." He led me back to the dais, our hands clasped tight. We stood together, facing our people, a united front. There would be challenges ahead. There were still wounds to heal, a pack to rebuild. But for the first time, there was more than just hope. There was certainty. Later that night, we stood on the balcony of his chambers, the moon hanging like a silver coin in the dark sky. The cool air was a balm. The citadel below was quiet, the pack settled and at peace, for the first time in a generation. Theron wrapped his arms around me from behind, pulling me back against the solid warmth of his chest. He buried his face in my hair, inhaling my scent. "I thought I was searching for a weapon to fix my pack," he murmured against my ear. "I was a fool. I wasn't looking for a weapon. I was looking for a miracle." I leaned back into him, my heart full. The journey from the dark, damp cellar to this balcony had been terrifying and wondrous. I had been dragged from my hiding place in fear, only to find my destiny waiting for me in the moonlight. I was no longer broken. I was whole. "We will heal them," I said, my voice full of the conviction I now felt in my very bones. "Together." He turned me in his arms to face him. His silver eyes, so often filled with the burdens of his crown, were now clear and bright with love and devotion. "Together," he agreed, his voice a soft growl of promise. He lowered his head and kissed me, a slow, deep kiss that spoke not of desperation, but of forever. It was a kiss of partnership, of shared strength, of a future forged not in the shadows of the past, but in the brilliant silver light of a new dawn. And as the moon watched over us, I knew I was finally home.